So this is chapter 5. We're going to be talking about social groups and also organizations. So before we jump into the various types of groups that sociology as a discipline studies, we're going to define some terms such as social status and also social roles. And we're also going to talk about different types of social statuses and social roles. And then from there, we'll kind of break down and go to various types of groups in society. And the two main categories we'll talk about are called non-social groups and also social groups. So your social status is a social position that you have in society or in your life. It's a certain title or position that you have. So for example, at this point, one of my social status is UACCM instructor. One of your statuses is college student, but we also have a UACCM instructor here as well. But there's a lot more to us than you being a college student and me being an instructor. We all have different types of statuses, whether we are a daughter or a mother or a father or a business owner. These are all different types of statuses that we have. Some statuses are statuses that we are born with. These are called ascribed status, such as your sex, your race, and your nationality. You're born with it. It's just kind of handed to you. An achieved status is the status that you earn. A few days ago, we went to the UACCM graduation. We got to see all these students become college graduates. They achieved that. So anything you have to put forth any type of effort in, this is going to be the achieved status. Being a mother, being a father, being a business owner, a gamer, an artist, a musician, a veteran, even a felon, got to put forth some sort of effort. These may not always be positive statuses, but still, you got to do something to earn it. Divorcee, all right? If you've gone through a divorce and you have earned the title of being a divorcee. You earned it. The judge has signed off, all right? Your master status is the status that you most identify with. It's like when you think about yourself, there's probably various statuses or positions in your life, and there may be one or two that you really identify with, that you reflect on, that is the most important to you, that you put forth the most effort and energy. And this is going to be different for all of us. For some of you, it may be being a mother, being a father. For some of you, it may be your master status may be being a college student. For some of you, it may be Christian, whatever it may be. But sometimes your master status, as the years go by, it changes. So whenever I was in college, my master status was a college student. I was very driven. I was very tunnel focused for 6 years, and my entire identity at that time was being a college student. I put everything into it. But college ends, obviously. And so from there, it went from being a husband and being a father. And so, as life goes by, our master statuses can evolve and change whenever we evolve and change. So the social status is the title. So if you can imagine that you're an employee somewhere and you have a name tag and it tells you what your title is. The social roles are the expectations of that title, so the responsibilities of that title. So mother is a social status. The responsibilities of a mother, the social roles, loving, nurturing, provider, those are the expectations. American soldier, that is a title. That is a social status. The social roles or expectations of that American soldier is to be courageous, to be loyal, to defend the country. All right, so one has to do with the title, one has to do with the expectations of that. Prescribed roles. These are going to be society's ideal expectation of a status. Society's ideal standard of the ideal mother, the ideal soldier, the ideal student. Most of us in here would probably agree on what constitutes a good father or a good mother or a good student. We could all probably agree upon that because society kind of sets that standard. But just because society sets that standard doesn't mean everybody perceives or achieves that level. They may not want to. So role perception is how you perceive the importance of your role or a status that you have. The importance of being a college student or being a husband or a wife or a mother or father. It's your perception of it. Does it rank high? Is it somewhere in the middle where it's important, but it's not the most important? Or is it at the very bottom? We have some parents out there that is the most important thing in the world to them, is to be a good mom or be a good dad. So their perception is it's very high. You have other parents out there where they're very indifferent. They may be absent. They may not be around at all. They may be emotionally absent. They may be physically absent. So their perception is it's not really that important. It's more of a burden to me. And the reason that this is important is because it leads to the last one, which is called role performance. This is how you perform your role as being a mom or a dad or a student or an employee. And obviously, if your perception of that status is important to you, then you're probably going to put forth more effort into it. So role performance is how you perform that role. Let's take a look at a few other terms. So anytime you're dealing with expectations, it can create strain and stress and pressure and confusion, and it can cause sometimes some issues. It's just kind of part of being a human being. Anytime we have different statuses, we have different responsibilities, it can create levels of pressure on us. That's not a bad thing. That's what motivates us and gets us out of bed in the morning to go to school or to go to work and to handle our business. So role ambiguity is whenever there's some confusion. It's a little bit unclear about what's expected of you. So you may experience this as a new college student. A little bit, it's kind of uncharted territory. Or if you bring your first child home and all of a sudden you're a mom or a dad for the first time ever, there may be a little bit of confusion, a little bit of uncertainty on how you navigate this brand new life that you have. You just got married to somebody. Now you have the responsibility of being a husband or being a wife. It's a little bit unclear. But as the time goes by, the clarity starts to come. You kind of get into this rhythm of understanding your responsibilities of being a student or a wife or a mother or a business owner, whatever it may be. Role strain is the strain or the stress that you may feel based on a certain status that you have. I have no doubt that y'all feel some level of strain or anxiety going through college. But this is a normal thing. This is what, like I said, this is what gets us out of bed. It's what motivates us to study and get assignments done. The same thing that deals with if you are an employee, you're working somewhere, you probably feel some level of responsibility to do a good job. Same thing as if you are a daughter or a son or a husband or a wife, these responsibilities. So role strain is not the enemy. Strain and stress is not the enemy. This is what motivates us and gets us out of bed, which is important. The danger is too much stress. It's too much anxiety. And we have too much on our plate where we are juggling way too much. It can cause a lot of issues. It can cause emotional problems, psychological issues, depression, anxiety. Some people turn to self-medication to deal with the anxiety, such as drugs or alcohol. So stress is not the enemy. Too much stress, that's the danger zone right there. You gotta be careful of. The third term is called role conflict. And I'm sure everybody in here experiences. This is whenever you have two different statuses and you feel like you are being pulled in two different directions at the same exact time. You have the responsibility of work, you have the responsibility of being a student, you have the responsibility to your family, you have responsibility to your church, you have responsibilities here, there, and everywhere, and you feel like you're kind of being pulled. So role conflict is whenever you have two different statuses and the expectations of those statuses occur at the same exact time. And you have to choose, which hat am I going to put on? Am I going to put on my mommy hat or am I going to put on my student hat? We have a lot of non-traditional parents that come here to UACCM. They go home, they need to sit down at the dinner table, they need to take care of their college algebra, but at the same exact moment, their young son in the next room is calling them out, "Mommy, mommy, can you please come play with me?" That's tough. And at that moment, she has a decision to make. Am I going to sit here and am I going to focus on this paper or this college algebra, or am I going to stand up and I'm going to go hang out with my kid? And she has to make that decision. We all have to make this decision every single day. So that's that conflict whenever we're wearing many hats. All of these things are natural. We experience it. Sometimes we experience all three of these on a daily basis. They kind of roll into each other. Any questions, comments? All right. So let's break down, and we're going to be talking about social groups, non-social groups, and also social groups. And if you remember, we did talk a little bit in chapter 2 about Emil Durkheim, where he talked about group dynamics. So the very smallest group that you can possibly have is 2 people. It's called a dyad, the smallest group possible. If you add another person to that dyad, what do you think it's called then? Triad. That's right. It's called a triad. And what's interesting is that as sociology as a discipline studies groups, the one thing that it knows is that any time that you add an extra person to a group, it changes the dynamic of that group. So if you're hanging out with your peer groups on the weekend and all of a sudden you have a new person that kind of enters into the group, you can feel the energy start to shift. The personalities are different, and even the way people interact with each other, it may kind of throw things off or it may kind of enhance it. The same thing happens whenever you start having more children. Anytime you bring an extra child into a home, the energy, the dynamic, everything really kind of starts to shift. So we're not just studying various types of groups, but sociology also wants to understand the group dynamics, how they interact with each other, especially like family dynamics. Are they interacting with each other in a healthy, functional, loving way? Or is it dysfunctional and toxic or abusive? Right? So the first category we'll talk about are non-social groups. So non-social groups, there's not going to be any social interaction. It's just a way of kind of collectively putting numbers or percentages or categories together to kind of understand the world around us. So the first non-social group are called statistical groups. Sociologists use these all the time. Researchers from all disciplines use this all the time to kind of understand the world around us. So a statistical group is going to be groups that are going to be identified through numbers and percentages. One example will be the average marriage lasts around 8 years. That's a statistical group. The fastest growing age population in the United States are people 85 and older. Poverty rates for Native Americans are at the highest of any other race or ethnic group at 25%. The majority of those do live on reservations. And here are a few different links. Some of these we've talked about before. We have the U.S. Census that pulls an incredible amount of demographic data that sociologists use. And also here is the Uniform Crime Report, which gives us crime statistics. So all of these are kind of used in research. So these are called statistical groups. Now, a lot of times when it comes to statistical groups, it'll kind of move into categorical groups, because statistical groups are usually made up of various types of categories. So for example, I just said that, Native Americans, 25, the poverty rates for Native Americans are 25%. So it is a statistical group, but it's also a categorical group because it describes the poverty rates of Native Americans. So categorical groups are also going to be non-social groups. Just a way of grouping people based on categories: race, ethnicity, social class, their religion, their nationality, veterans, single mothers, various types of categories. And that kind of moves us into social groups. And this is going to be where there is actually social interaction. This is the one thing that, like I mentioned earlier, Emil Durkheim had mentioned when he talked about it. So if you remember, he did extensive study on the social phenomenon of suicide, but he also studied group dynamics as well. He talked a lot about that collective conscience, that whenever like-minded people, they come together, there's a common spirit, there's a common energy that brings them together. And he talked about this when it comes to religion. Religion has a way of unifying people, brings about camaraderie. They lean on each other during difficult times. Since we are a social species, it enhances our emotional well-being to have close emotional connections with other people, even if it's only a couple people. So the first social group we'll talk about are called aggregate groups. A lot of times we kind of move into these throughout our day. They're very random, very sporadic, and this is the kind of social interaction whenever we go to a particular place, we're there for a common reason. We may stay there for a particular reason for a little while, and then we leave and go about our day. So if we're going to the grocery store, there may be social interaction. We go to the post office, we get on a plane, and we decide to fly somewhere for vacation or whatever, and we talk to the person sitting next to us. That's a social interaction that you have, and you may never see these people again. Very sporadic, very random, but these are social interactions that we have throughout our day. Now, an organization or association, these are not very random or sporadic. They're usually planned. You could have planned meetings. So if you were part of Phi Theta Kappa, an honor society, if you are part of a particular sports team that meets regularly, if you are involved in church on any level where you are participating actively within the congregation of the church, well, this is an organization. It's structured, it has different levels of hierarchy, it meets, and you also tend to know these people because you're meeting these people regularly. It's not like an aggregate group where you kind of run into somebody, say, hey, how's your day going? And you never see these people again. You tend to know these individuals within the organization. Let's talk about the differences between what's known as primary and secondary groups. Primary groups are going to be groups of people that you are emotionally connected to. They usually include your friends and your family. These could be lifelong relationships that you have throughout the course of your life. There's a level of emotional connection where you care about these people, you're emotionally invested in these people, and you want the best for these people. They're in your primary circle. Where we spend the majority of our day, though, is not within the primary circle, but it's within these secondary groups. So secondary groups, an example of that would be a classroom setting or a work environment. So the relationships that you would have with your classmates or your coworkers. So it's really more of acquaintances. So where primary groups are emotionally connected, secondary groups are more goal-oriented. You're there to become an educated individual, to achieve a goal, or to earn some money. So these are more goal-oriented. This is where we spend probably the majority of our time. So these are referred to as secondary groups. They also tend to be temporary. At some point, college ends. At some point, your career ends. So the relationships you have with those people, they may last for a certain particular time period, but then you kind of move on. Very different than a primary group where these could be lifelong relationships. But the main difference between the primary and secondary groups, or the circles, is the amount of emotional connection. That's what constitutes if an individual is in your primary group or in your secondary group, is if you are emotionally connected to them. What that means is that primary and secondary groups are fluid. People move in and people move out of these based on emotional connection. So if you start working at a new business and you become best friends with a coworker as the years go by. Well, that individual that in the very beginning was a coworker of yours, an acquaintance of yours, was in your secondary group. But the fact that you became really close to them emotionally and they became a best friend or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a husband, that kind of moved them into your primary circle or your primary group. But what moves into one group can also move out of one as well. An example of this would be a divorced couple. So initially, prior to them getting divorced, they're married, they may be raising a family. Obviously, they have a primary group. They're in the primary circle. Something happens, there's a rift for whatever reason, they decide to get a divorce. Now it becomes more goal oriented. So the only time that they would probably communicate with each other would be for one reason and one reason only. And what would that be?
The children.
The children, that's it. That's it. That's the only reason that they would need. If you don't have children with them, most likely you're probably going to go your separate ways, and you're probably not going to really talk that much, not unless you just happen to be friends, which is fine. But then it kind of becomes goal oriented, where whenever you do communicate with each other, it's usually about the kids. Me and my ex-wife, we talk every day, every single day. We've been co-parenting our kids for well over a decade. We were texting each other last night. I consider her a friend of mine, but we co-parent and we raise our kids together. So the fact that we are divorced doesn't mean that we are not in a relationship with each other. We will always be in a relationship with each other as long as we have kids. We're going to be 80 years old and our kids are going to be in their 50s and 60s. They'll become grandparents. We'll become great grandparents. We'll have a party and I'll probably see her then. So there's always going to be some level of relationship there. So that's not a bad thing, though. And then there's an unusual situation where sometimes divorced couples, they get remarried to each other. I'm not saying that. I'm not going to do that. She's married. I'm not going to remarry. But that happens. So you're married once, so they're in their primary group. You get a divorce, go to the secondary. They fall in love again, right? And then they go back to being a primary group. That's what I meant by it's fluid. It kind of rolls into each other. So let's talk now about the difference between in-groups and out-groups. These are groups that either one, you feel connected to, you feel like there's a commonality, or you don't. The difference between in-groups and out-groups compared to primary and secondary is that people that are part of your in-group and out-group, you may not know them at all. But the only reason that you have a connection with them is because there's a commonality. So people that are part of your out-group, these are going to be people that you may not really identify with. You may not understand. They have a different type of lifestyle. They may come from a different culture, a different country, a different nationality. There's just somewhat of a disconnect. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't like these people or there's any level of prejudice or discrimination, but there could be, actually. So people that are part of different types of political parties, people of different religions, people of different generations, people of different nationalities, there may be some level of a disconnect where they don't really connect with each other. So they may be part of an out-group. When it comes to rivalries, sports rivalries, one's going to be an in-group, the other will be an out-group. Now, in-groups are going to be groups of people that you do feel connected to. Most likely, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you know these people. So if you're raised Catholic your whole life, most likely other Catholic people are in your in-group, but that doesn't mean that you know every Catholic on the planet. It just means that there's kind of a commonality. The same thing goes for people of the same generation. Most people identify and understand people of their generation better than other generations. Veterans, people who've served in the military, they have some level of connection to every other veteran because they have had experiences that other veterans have. And most likely, even if they're 40 years apart, they can typically sit down and have a conversation with each other and talk about boot camp, talk about deployments, and they kind of understand each other. People who've been incarcerated and they've spent time in prison, they can identify and understand other people who've actually gone through that difficult process. People who've gone through addiction before. That's part of their in-group as well. But these are also very fluid and subjective as well. Sometimes people change religions. And so at one time it was an out group, and now it becomes part of your in group. Some people change political parties, where at one time it was an out group. Don't really understand you, don't really believe in what you believe in, but I've changed political affiliation, and now you're part of my in group. So just like primary and secondary groups can change, who you identify with being part of your in group and out group can also change based on you changing as well, if that makes any sense. So let's take a look at an interesting psychological dynamic that can happen whenever an in-group and an in-group and an out-group, they intersect with each other. So whatever group that you are a part of, psychologically, from your perspective, that is your in-group because you're part of that. Any group outside of that is going to be the out-group. But the out-group, from your perception, if they're looking at it from their perspective, are they the in-group or are they the out-group? Trying not to confuse you. If you're part of an in-group, this is my group, but you look at them and you say, well, they're part of the out-group. That's your perception. But from their perspective over there, are they the out-group or are they the in-group?
They're the in-group.
That's right. That's exactly right. They're the in-group from their perspective because they're looking at you as being the out-group. That's right. Okay. So something interesting that can happen whenever there's a perception that an out-group is attacked the in-group. It could be a physical attack. It could be a verbal attack. It could be an emotional type of attack. One thing that can happen is that the in-group may tend to unify and come together because they just felt attacked on some level. And so they rally the troops, they rally together, they come together to kind of unify to support each other. It's a pretty natural thing to happen. Another thing that can happen, which you got to be very mindful of, you got to be careful of, is there may be a tendency for the in-group, just because they were attacked, to start stereotyping those broad generalizations to the out-group that attacked them. And the reason that you have to be careful of this is because anytime we're throwing out a broad generalization to an entire group of people, it doesn't mean that it actually fits them completely. So this can happen on both a macro and a micro level. So I'll give you an example of how it doesn't fit. Let's say you have a young girl, and she has an issue with her boyfriend who is cheating on her. It's a very painful process, but because of that, she may start to feel that all young men are going to be cheaters. That's going to be the stereotype. Now, we know that's not true. This individual was burned, they had a bad experience, and that's where I'm saying you have to be careful of that stereotype. Sometimes people have a bad experience with somebody of a different race or a different nationality. And instead of looking at it, well, I had an altercation with this individual here, there may be a tendency to say all of them are like that. Everybody of that race or that nationality are like that. That's the area you have to be careful of, the stereotype. Even within a church setting, sometimes people are part of a congregation where they feel attacked, they feel judged, they feel like everybody's against them. And they may decide, you know what, I'm going to leave the church completely, and not fully understanding that there may be one or two people that didn't treat you right, but in your mind, the entire congregation is guilty of it. That's where you have to be careful of. So those are some examples of how it can happen on a micro level. But this can also happen on a larger scale as well. One example would be whenever Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, which pulled us into World War II. So there was an attack. Japan is the out group. They attacked the United States, which is the in group. So where did the stereotyping come in? Well, two things happened. Number one, the United States unified and it pulled us into World War II. But the second thing that happened was Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed an executive order called Executive Order 9066 that put Japanese Americans in internment camps for several years during World War II. Yeah, it was in Arkansas. That's right. That's right. Absolutely. So these were American citizens. These were Japanese American citizens that were put in these internment camps because the loyalty of Japanese Americans were in question. Are you loyal to Japan? Are you loyal to the United States? That's an example of how you got to be very careful not to stereotype broad groups of people because it can lead to very dangerous things. The Westboro Baptist Church. We just saw a disturbing video about the Westboro Baptist Church. So from their perspective, in their own little world, in their little bubble, are they the in-group or are they the out-group?
They're the in-group.
They are the in-group. And who's the out-group, according to them?
The troops.
Everybody. Everybody. Everybody who's not.
God is their out-group, honestly.
Everybody.
It's hateful.
Yeah, everybody is. So, and they, what's interesting is that even though that they are on the attack of everybody else, whenever they feel attacked, what does it do? It unified them. It kind of brought them together. And then they started to stereotype. Well, everybody's damned. Everybody's evil. Everybody's bad, right? So like I said, this can work on both very small individual perceptions and also much larger scales as well. All right, next we have peer groups. So peer groups are primary groups. So these are going to consist of people that you are usually emotionally close to. It's not just acquaintances. These are people that you care about, that you love, and that they're very close to you. Usually people of a similar age range. So these are primary groups, people that you're connected to. They can be very important. They can create a sense of belonging, make you feel like you are part of something. We talked about this the other day. We talked about subcultures, music subcultures, artists, gamers. Kind of brings people together, makes them feel like they're part of something. That's good. But sociologists, when it comes to peer groups, the way that they look at peer groups is how they interact with each other and how they influence us. And what we do know is that not all peer group interaction is functional and healthy. Not at all. So just because you emotionally connect with people and you feel like you're part of a group doesn't mean it's a healthy dynamic. It doesn't mean that it brings about the best of you. It doesn't mean that it influences you to make positive, good decisions at all. Sometimes we are part of peer groups that influence us in the worst way possible, in a negative way. Drugs, alcohol, laziness, criminal activity, very dysfunctional things. But there may be other types of peer groups that we're part of that bring out the best of us. They encourage us, they lift us up, they encourage us to make positive decisions, to have a healthy type of lifestyle. So sociology just doesn't look at peer groups and how do you feel about it? No, it's how do you interact with each other? This is something we have to be kind of mindful of, because when it comes to peer groups and the people that we're hanging out with, especially if we're spending a lot of time with them, they can have a negative effect on our lives. The way we feel, the way we perceive, and the way that we interact. And this is something that we have to do throughout the course of our lives, whether we're young, middle-aged, or old. Who are we hanging out with? And also, how are they influencing us? Are they bringing about the best in us? And if they are, then they're a blessing. Let's keep them in our lives. If they're bringing us down a dark road and we're doing things that we know we shouldn't be doing, then maybe we need to set boundaries, or maybe even sometimes cut those people out of our lives. Next, we have formal organizations. So this is also a social group, but these are very large social groups. So a formal organization are going to be large organizations. It could be for-profit or it could be a nonprofit organization. It could be a political association, but their main objective is to either gain profit or provide some sort of service in society. They tend to be very large, made up of a lot of people, a lot of dynamics. Hospitals are an example. We need hospitals if we are sick or we're injured. Prison systems are another example of large formal organizations that are very large, they're very dynamic, they're very important to society. Our educational system, churches, universities, the American military, these are all examples. Even UACCM is a formal organization. But what's really important about all these organizations, since they tend to be large, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of moving parts. What's really important about these formal organizations is they are efficient, if they are doing what they are supposed to be doing. And the way that a lot of formal organizations will do this is what's known as bureaucracy. And bureaucracy is going to be a set of rules and guidelines and characteristics to allow a formal organization to run very smoothly and very efficiently. So let's say you're driving down I-40. Your tire blows out and you get into a wreck and you've injured your hip. Pick up your phone and you dial 911 because you feel like you need to go to the hospital. How quickly do you want the ambulance to get to you? Fast, as fast as possible. What that means is that the structures between that phone call need to be put in place to make sure that you are getting the help that you need as quickly as possible. And that's what bureaucracy is all about. It's all about getting people the things they need as quickly and efficiently as possible. So the way they do that is through various characteristics. Number one is having very clear and objective policies. Even UACCM, sometimes we have certain types of policies that we need to edit, we need to tweak, we need to change. But if we do make any changes at UACCM, it's usually because we think that if we make these changes, then there's going to be a better outcome. Number two, qualifications. So you're going to have people that are going to have different types of jobs, different type of experiences. So if you take a look at the American military, all the way down to the lowest level private, all the way to the top generals, you have various people with different types of qualifications, different types of experiences, and different type of jobs that they have. All of them are important in different types of ways. And what that does, it creates this chain of command, this division of labor where you have different people doing different types of jobs, which is important. Here at UACCM, we have different people doing different types of jobs, all the way down to the groundskeeper, to people who are handling custodial, to admissions, registrar, instructors, staff. Everybody has a part to play, and it's all important for the machine to run very, very smoothly. So that's what that division of labor is. And it does create this chain of command. The reason a chain of command is important is because it's important to understand who you report to. So if you know your direct contact above you, if you have an issue, you report to them. But it's also equally important to understand who's below you and who are you over and who are you responsible for. Everybody needs to understand this. Lastly, professionalism. So whether we're talking about a church, a college, university, the military, a major corporation, one thing that is usually expected of the employees or the people that are kind of part of that organization is to be professional. The way they speak, the way they carry themselves, the way they interact with people. Because if they are unprofessional, it can cause a lot of issues within the company. Sometimes we see this in social media. Somebody who's working for a company or an organization says something or does something that brings a level of embarrassment to the company or the organization, then they may end up getting fired for it. I've been at UACCM for many, many years. And so whenever I leave campus and I go into town or I go into Conway or whatever, I have to constantly be mindful because I've been here so long that a lot of times whenever people see me on the streets, they see UACCM as well. So I have to be always mindful of where I am, what I'm doing, and how I interact with people, even if I'm quote unquote not on the clock. Because what I do and what I say, whether it's out in public or on social media, is going to be a reflection of UACCM. And one thing that I typically will tell students at this point here is that, social media is a big part of our lives, TikTok and Instagram and all these types of things. But when it comes to your professional careers and your reputation in the place that you work, you have to be very, very careful about what you are posting online for the world to see, what you are saying online, If you are disgruntled, it's probably not the best thing to kind of throw that out there, um, because it can not only affect your career in the future, but it can also affect your ability to get interviews in the future. Prior to working at UACCM, I worked in assisted living facilities, and this was many years ago, but what we would often do is that we would look up people's social media that we were looking at hiring, especially if it was a professional position, a managerial position, high level position. We would often do deep dives in their social media to see what we could find. And this was years ago, before Instagram and TikTok and all this other kind of stuff. This was way before it got huge. And there were times that we saw some things online that, even though on paper they looked really good, that it was embarrassing. It was controversial. And so I remember specifically there were people that we decided collectively to not interview at all because of that. So with that said, especially with the young generation very much being involved in social media, please keep that in mind. If there's anything online that needs to be deleted or cleaned up, I would suggest that you do that as soon as possible, because a lot of times those things can stay on the internet for a long time. So just kind of keep mindful of that. And I'm not just talking to young people, even middle-aged people need to be really careful about what they do. We're constantly seeing people get in trouble, getting fired, losing their families, getting divorced because of the things that they do online. So be careful.